Should we be concerned about Keyonte George's excessive amount of turnovers? It's next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, how are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Today, should we be concerned about the amount of turnovers we're seeing out of Jazz point guard Keyonte George? Colin Sexton has come off the bench. Is this his future as a sixth man? And why not Oklahoma City to win the whole dang shebang this early in their run? Those are the things we're talking about today. As I mentioned, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free. We're available on all podcasting apps. We are also on YouTube. Thumbs up and 5 stars are greatly appreciated, and please subscribe when you get an opportunity to do so on the YouTube programming. That makes a big deal, as well as following on everything else. To the everydayers, you're the best. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a everydayer to the show. It is greatly appreciated. Wednesday edition of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right. So in the last, by the way, just for those of you on YouTube, if you haven't noticed this year, instead of back of hotel rooms, I've put in a virtual background whenever I'm on the road of usually of the cities of the city that we're in. So I did basically the same for you here in Oklahoma. All right. So Keyonte is turning the ball over. Keyonte turned the ball over 6 times to 8 assists the other day. In the last 2 games against Minnesota, he has a 1-to-1 assist to turnover rate of 10-10. Prior to that, he's had 4-3-2 in the turnovers. He's had 5 assists or 4 assists or more in 4 of his last 6 full games. In 5 of his last 9 full games. Is this a concern? So let me start on a few items here. One, general philosophy, I have never been one particularly bothered by turnovers. There's been very little correlation in the NBA between good offenses and low turnover teams. That has swung a little bit. So this year in the NBA, the top offenses are now better taking care of the ball than ever before. And this might be because with the offensive explosion that's taking place in the NBA, that was taking place in the NBA, that it is more important than ever to actually get shots off. In the years past, there has not been a massive correlation between being a good offensive team and being a low turnover team. But that's different this year. Boston's number 1 offensive team in the league. They're the 3rd best taking care of the ball. Indiana's the 8th best. Oklahoma City's the 2nd best. Clippers are 14th. Milwaukee's 4th. Dallas is 6th, and Denver's 10th. So the top 7 offenses, 6 of them are in the top 10. And then if you go the other way, of the bottom 5 offenses in the league, they are all bottom 7 turnover teams. And if you go to the bottom 8 offenses in the league, all but one of them's bottom 10. So there is a swing here in the NBA where actually, sorry, let me fix that last note. The bottom 5 teams are all bottom 10, but not the other one. The other one, I missed that. The bottom 5 teams are all bottom 10. So it just might be that San Antonio, Detroit, Portland, Charlotte, and Memphis are not very good. Otherwise, it's not the rest of them. But there is more of a correlation between not turning the ball over and good offense than there has been in years past. That's the first thing. So I have generally been one who's not concerned about just tell me what your offensive rating is, and I don't care what your turnovers are. And that there now does seem to be more of a correlation. I've always kind of felt like if you make the next play that leads to a basket. The second thing that is true with rookies is that generally turnovers are fine because turnovers mean that you're on the verge of making a play, right? So you'd rather what you're actually concerned about is when you have a rookie that goes out there and has no turnovers, no points, it's just not doing anything, has no impact. That's a far bigger concern than somebody who has turnovers. So what was my feeling on Keyonte's turnovers? So those would be the two reasons I haven't been bothered. The only area where I do think it should be thought about, and what I think about it, honestly, is not whether it should be concerning, but it might be you're evaluating how you're going to use him in the future. So is there a chance that he needs to play more off ball? And that maybe being the primary ball handler is not his best role as a pure point guard. I think that probably is where the turnovers lead to some discussion. Now, ironically enough, his turnovers have spiked in the last 2 games against Minnesota, who is big physical and turns people over, when Chris Dunn is starting with him and he suddenly is playing off ball. Now, there's obviously a lot less spacing when you're playing with Chris Dunn because he's not thought of as a shooter, so he's not guarded. He shot the ball very well this year, but teams don't guard him as maybe more closely than they did earlier this year, but they generally don't. And when he's been playing at times with Bryce Sensabaugh, teams aren't really guarding Bryce Sensabaugh right now either. I don't think Bryce, it's changing a little bit on who he plays with his minutes. Bryce, I think, is one of his last 17 from 3, and so until you start making some shots, people aren't going to guard you. So there could be just some floor spacing issues. But I do think it leads to a little bit of a conversation of all right, is Keyonte better on the ball or off the ball? Now, if you remember going back to Keyonte's collegiate play, Keyonte had a 1-to-1, had more turnovers and assists, and that was one of the questions on him coming into the draft. So it may re-bubble that question to the top a little bit. The other one I would just say on Keyonte's turnovers, and I don't know what my thought of, I think they're largely, to me, based on a little looseness or being casual. And I kind of get it. When you're 20 years old and you've been the best player on the floor in every game you've ever played, you probably got away with being casual and got away with being loose at times. And you can't really get away with that in the NBA anymore. But there's the underhand pass, or there's the wing pass that's just an automatic that's being overplayed. There's the dribble splitting double teams. There's just some things in those turnovers that are, to me, I would call them loose or casual. And again, no definitive statement to be made 55, 60 games into a guy's career, because I think that's just how he's probably always played and gotten away with it. And so can he get rid of that knowing, I'm in the league now. The association's not going to let me do that. So should we be concerned about Keyonte's turnovers? Probably not. But they do, I think, lead to some discussion of what's the best way to use him and who you're trying to put with him and what he's doing. But on the scale of things you're watching out of him, I would put this one on the lower scale, with the admission that turnovers have become more prominently important in the NBA than they were in years past. That something's happened with the way the NBA's offensive explosion has gone, that not getting a shot on a given possession seems to be more important to take care of the ball than it has been in years past. The other thing we've seen the last 2 games is Colin Sexton, the 6th man. This gets into a really interesting thing about team development and the difficulty. We've touched on this a little bit recently on how you build a franchise. And so we're going to get to that. And then why not Oklahoma City to win the whole thing? We're going to continue and talk about it coming up here on Locked On Jazz. Wednesday edition of Locked On Jazz is brought to you by my friends over at my good friend Steve Carter over at Intercap Lending. Steve Carter does just amazing work for us. Intercap has been our loan officer for Locked On now for an extended period of time. And the reviews just keep coming in time and time again. It's pretty awesome. I give Steve credit. Like it must be neat for Steve to hear these ads and hear all these people, because Zoe Gomez writes, my experience with Intercap Lending and Steven has been nothing short of amazing. Not only were they very timely and responsive when it came to communication, but they efficiently got my significant other and I approved and funded within a couple of weeks. If you would like a stress-free and amazing experience, I highly suggest Steven and Intercap Lending. Steven he is truly amazing. I cannot tell you how amazing he's been for me in the 2 loans I've done with him. He's been multiple people inside the Locked On company, and he just keeps getting better and better. And it is a tougher world out there for all of us in the loan world. So if you need a loan right now and you're in the market, Intercap Lending is here for you. Give Steve Carter a call, but you can reach me at dlock09@gmail.com, and we'll take care of you. Or call Steve at 385-800-8528. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. You can call Steve at 385-800-8528, or just email me straight at dlock09@gmail.com, and I'll get you set up so you get your Locked On VIP treatment. If you do not go through me, that's fine, but do make sure you mention that you were Locked On so you get your VIP your VIP treatment and your VIP rates. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Your ride or die. Passion, drive, patient. What brings home today's winning trophy for your ride or for your building a championship? eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle leveled up to peak performance for superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors got you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need for prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into MVP. Bring home. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Motors, Guaranteed Fit, only U.S. available to U.S. customers. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day today. All right, tomorrow's the day. It is here, the first ever Locked On 24/7 stream. Locked On Sports Today, first people ever to have a national 24/7 stream on YouTube, and now sports stream on YouTube, and now baseball fans, starting at 5 o'clock Mountain, 7 o'clock Eastern. The MLB preview show is coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. That's 5 o'clock Mountain, 7 o'clock Eastern tomorrow. Be the first to get your local insight from the MLB experts of your local Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Locked On Sports Today 24/7, streaming on YouTube or your free Amazon Fire TV channel. As I said yesterday, I would love some feedback from you if you're watching the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream on YouTube. Is it something you like to watch? What would make it better? We're building 2.0, 3.0, and 4.0 right now. I obviously have some visions on what I think that is, but I'd love your insight, so feel free to share with me. All right, so in the last few games, Colin Sexton's come off the bench. Colin, as a starter, has been fabulous. As I've said this year, I think the story of the season is Colin Sexton. If the story of last year was Lauri Markkanen, the story of this year is Colin Sexton. So the Jazz put Colin Sexton in the 24th game of the season. They put Colin into the starting lineup, and he stayed in the starting lineup to the 66th game. He played 43 games. He averaged 21 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists. Shot 50% from the field, 43% from 3, and 86% from the line. Absolutely awesome. And so for the last 2 games, we've played Colin Sexton off the bench. And he's played 30 and 36 minutes. He actually played in the game the other night coming off the bench. Colin played the most minutes he's played in any game since January 20th. So it's certainly not impacting his minutes played. The one thing I think is interesting here is whether or not this is how the Jazz use Colin eventually. He's averaged 23 points a game in the 2 games. He only has 2 rebounds. He does have his 6 assists. He's shooting 55% field and 3. He hasn't gone to the line yet, but like he actually should go to the line more because he comes into the game when we're in the penalty. He had 10 assists the first game. Colin's ridiculous right now, by the way. His last 4 games, he shot 9 of 16 for 55% in all of them, except he went 9 of 17 the last one. I mean, Colin's efficiency as an offensive player right now is really, really high level. His last 8 games, he's 51% from the floor and 47% from 3. And 90% from the line. It's a little nutty. But here's one of the things I think is interesting here. We kind of alluded to this with Aaron Gordon and some of these other players. In those cases, it was draft picks and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. If you're an everydayer, you heard those shows. One of the problems in those circumstances is that these players, they don't fulfill your role. And then you get frustrated with them. They move on. They go to their next team. They play a smaller role, and it's all perfect. The other thing that can happen when you're developing a franchise is a player can vault into a role that might be bigger or beyond what his role is going to be when you become great. And I think there's a little question of Colin on that. Like, on a great team, Colin's probably a 28-minute-a-night 6-man. But if he's a 34-minute-a-night starter for us and then we try to convert him to a 28-minute-a-night 6-man, is that super frustrating to him? And does that make it so that he's unhappy? It's not really Colin's personality to be unhappy, but it's a thought that should the Jazz try to start using Colin in the mold of the player he's going to be when the team finally becomes really, really good. Or as Will says, championship level. Because at that point, Colin's your 6-man. Colin's coming off the bench, changing games, probably playing with 2 bigger guards. Keyonte hopefully being one of them, and somebody else we get along the way who's 6'5", 6'6". Unless Bryce Sensabaugh fully develops. But probably not expecting that out of the 28th pick of the draft. So, and then Colin comes off the bench as a scorer. Maybe he plays 28, 30 minutes a night. This efficiency level he's playing with right now is elite level stuff. He's a piece. There's no question in my mind. I'm a believer in efficiency. I'm a believer in points gained. And Colin Sexton is having an elite level offensive year. When you look at NBA teams and you want to know like what wins in this league, like let's not kid ourselves. Like this is like if we're building a franchise and you like spot up shooting, okay? Here are the teams that are the best spot up shooting teams in the NBA. Boston, Milwaukee, New Orleans, Clippers, Thunder, Nuggets. Shooting. Spot up shooting. How do you get spot up shooting? Somebody's got to get you an advantage, get in the paint, get the ball. Okay, Colin does that. And Colin can shoot. Pick and roll ball handlers. Who have the best pick and roll ball handlers in the NBA? Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Milwaukee, Dallas, Chicago, actually. Clippers. That's why Chicago probably thinks they could be good. And the Pacers. Okay, that's not quite as defined, but that's the same concept. Right? That's the same. We get into the paint. We can make a play off the pick and roll, get something out to somebody. That's the answer. Who are the best isolation teams? Guys just can beat somebody. Clippers, Thunder, Dallas, Warriors, Atlanta, interestingly, Boston, New Orleans. Best teams in the NBA, universally, across the board. Colin creates those things with efficiency, with his ability to beat guys off the drive, with his ability to dish out, with his ability to make threes, with his new spot up, off the bounce 3 stuff. It's elite level stuff. The question is, or we may be overthinking it, but what is he eventually? Like, where does he fit? And what position does he play on a team that's really, really good? And it might be that he's a 6th man. And as a 6th man, then you start using him and getting him used to that now. And it's a weird thing to do, but you build the team kind of knowing you have your sixth man. That's kind of a weird concept that we would like, oh, we know we have Lowry, we know we have a sixth man, and we're building from there. That seems kind of funky, but maybe that is what we do. And we hopefully know that we have, a guard in Keyonte, but as we talked about in the last segment, maybe we don't know if it's a on-ball or off-ball guard. So it's interesting to see what we've done with Colin the last two games, and maybe we're playing him off the bench the rest of the way because or at least that's the plan, because of the fact that it sets Colin up to be a sixth man as you hope he would be moving forward. Why not Oklahoma City? We'll touch on it. I don't have a good reason, actually. I hate to say it. I'd love to give you all sorts of reasons why Oklahoma City isn't going to win this thing. I'm limited. It's next on Locked on Jazz. Today's edition of Locked on Jazz is brought to you in part by Nissan. Nissan's got 3 rides for you that should give you choices and a lot of fun. Let's run through them for you right now. There's the 2024 Nissan Rogue. The 2020, it's a perfect city drives, great escapes, class exclusive Google built-in, your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone, Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-side crossover for your next adventure. There is also the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, has room up to 8, expansive cargo capacity, advanced available 4x4 capability with 284 horsepower, up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. And the 2024 Nissan Armada will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style, tow bigger, and explore further. In the 2024 Armada, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, Nissan Armada to go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Thanks so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. Jazz Thunder tonight. It'll be available for you on the Utah Jazz app as well as on SiriusXM, where you can find all hometown broadcasts. On SiriusXM, we'll tip off at 6 o'clock. In Mountain Time, if you're back home, 6 o'clock Mountain Time then translates everywhere. So why not the Oklahoma City Thunder? Well, first thing, I don't have a good answer here. The Thunder are the number 3 offense and the number 6 defense. Check. A few years ago, the Memphis Grizzlies were really, really good, and you looked at them and you said, okay, well, they're not good in half-court offense. They're living by turnovers and they're living by transition. That's going to die out. And so you look at the Thunder and you begin to think maybe the same thing is true. The Thunder play the highest level of transition of any team in the league other than Toronto, which will be harder for them to do in the postseason. And defensively, one of their big advantages is they play the least amount of transition of anyone in the NBA other than Sacramento and Chicago. So they're the second most often team in transition and the third least in transition. So that you start to say, well, that's going to be a problem when they go to the postseason, except for the fact that their half-court defense is the third best in the NBA, which in the case of the Grizzlies, when they were in this circumstance, wasn't the case. And their half-court offense is best in the NBA. So if they get into the playoffs and they get into half court, they're actually better suited statistically to play half court offense. The best offenses in the NBA in the half court are the Thunder, Celtics, Clippers, Bucks, Pacers. The best defenses in the NBA in the half court are Minnesota, Cleveland, New Orleans and the Thunder tied, Celtics, Magic. Okay? It's a shooting league. Talked about that a minute ago. Best spot-up team in the NBA for shooting is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Or actually, it's the Boston Celtics. 1.17%. Followed by Milwaukee, 1.12. Followed by New Orleans, Clippers, and Thunder. Thunder are the best three-point shooting team in the NBA right now. And when you dig into it, all right, well, we'll take away. Well, not really anyone to take away. Lou Dort shooting the best three-point percentage since post-All-Star break. Jalen Williams, Santa Clara, is a bona fide third-best three-point shooter in the league. And then we'll see when they get to the playoffs, and maybe this goes away a little bit, but their young kids can all shoot it. And Gordon Hayward's going to be a part of this. But Cason Wallace is shooting 42% from three. Isaiah Joe's shooting 41% from three. He's that good. Chet Holmgren shoots 39% from three. The only real kind of thing I look at with the Thunder where I see any type of problem, and when I'm prepping for the Thunder last night, trying to find a gap, is honestly their starting lineup's not very good. Or not as good. And it's a little bit because of Josh Giddey, who's down to kind of 19, 20, 21 minutes a night. And it has to do with floor spacing. He doesn't really fit. He's a major piece that doesn't fit. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of Josh Giddey on the floor in the playoffs. Now, does that suddenly become Gordon Hayward? Well, then there's 6'9" in that position. But their of all their lineups, their starting lineup which is played like Goobles and gobbles more minutes than any other lineup they have. They've played 6,500 possessions. That's played 1,500. It's a lot. So their starters have played almost 25% of the minutes. They've been incredibly healthy. And they're +7. It's not great. The minute you go take and bring Isaiah Joe in for Josh Giddey, who's a shooter, they go from +7 to +25. The minute you bring in it'll be interesting to see the minute you bring Gordon Hayward instead in that lineup, what does that do? So it's going to be an interesting thing for them of how they use Josh Giddey. And one of the things that they have right now that's so great is they have this amazing depth in all these players. And I wonder if the one thing that could happen to them in the playoffs is that if Josh Giddey really isn't able to play because of his lack of shooting and floor spacing, does that somehow take away their depth? They're not terrible with Giddey on the floor. Let me make sure this is clear. They're +5. They're 78th percentile. Offensively, they're still 119.5. But they really, there's like one lineup that kind of busts out, but otherwise they're much more mundane when Giddey's on the floor, and you kind of look at it and say, well, okay, yeah, but they also have Shea on the floor all this time, and that's why they're good. But otherwise, you start running through this, there are not a lot of things that are gaps here. They're not a great rebounding team. I'm not sure that bothers me. I think they'll rebound in the playoffs. They're 28th offensive and 29th defensive. They struggle with a team like the Lakers. They're big, physical, and strong. I'm not sure they're going to see them. The only other, and actually, I don't know if this is bad for them necessarily. There is a thought that I had today when I was looking at stuff. So last night, Denver's win is mammoth. So Denver's win last night in Minnesota, which they were very fortunate. Minnesota did not have Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert, or Karl-Anthony Towns went down to the wire. Denver just doesn't have many losses left on their schedule. They're home against the Knicks on Thursday. Then they go to Portland and Memphis. They play Phoenix at home, Minnesota at home, Cleveland at home, San Antonio at home. Denver doesn't lose at home. Their road games, let's say Denver loses a home game. They just do. It happens. Their road games the rest of the way are Portland, Clippers, Jazz, Spurs, Grizzlies. Denver's not losing more than 2 more games this year. So I do think Denver finishes with close to 59 wins, and they're the number 1 seed. I just don't see losses. Maybe they lose to the Knicks on Thursday. Maybe they lose to Phoenix at home. But maybe they lose a game to Minnesota. They don't lose at home. Even if they lose 3 games. They're at 58 wins the rest of the way. Minnesota, now they got to get some guys back. But they don't have a lot of tough ones left either. They have Cleveland and Golden State coming up, followed by Detroit. They go to Denver. That's a loss. Then they have Chicago, Houston. Here's their remaining home games. Cleveland without Donovan, Golden State, Detroit, Chicago, Houston, Toronto, Washington, Atlanta, and Phoenix. They're not losing these games. They go to the road to Denver twice. They go to the Lakers and they go to Phoenix. They could lose those. So they could end up with 26 losses along the way. 26, 27 losses. The Thunder, to wrap this up, could end up sliding to 3. Not because there's anything wrong with the Thunder, just because the other teams aren't losing any games. And if we look at the Thunder schedule the rest of the way, they're like 15-point favorite tonight, so they're fine. Give me 1 second. My computer screen did not go where it was supposed to. But I don't know if going to 3 is a big deal for them because, frankly, Sacramento or Phoenix doesn't bother me a great deal with them. But the Thunder play us tonight. Then they go on the road to Toronto, Milwaukee, New Orleans. There's 2 potential losses there. Come back for 2 for Houston and Phoenix. Then they go on the road to New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Indiana, Charlotte, home to close it out against Kings, Spurs, Bucks, Dallas. I could see them getting to 25, 26 losses. I think there's a real chance they end up at 3rd. And if they're 3, I don't know that I think that's, other than the second round, beating Minnesota in the second round, home court advantage if Minnesota gets there. I like Oklahoma City as a playoff team a lot more than I like Minnesota. Minnesota's 17th in the league on offensively, and I think that's a problem. But as of right now, you'd open up with Sacramento. I don't think that's a problem for being a 3rd seed if you're the Thunder. Could be Dallas, could be Phoenix, though. And Dallas isn't great because your Luke in a playoff series is not fun. And there might be an argument that they'd rather be on the same side of the bracket as Minnesota than they would be on the same side of the bracket of the Clippers in New Orleans. New Orleans would be hard on this team that doesn't rebound. But there's not a lot of faults in that resume of why not for Oklahoma City. Jazz Thunder tonight. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll be with you tomorrow. And then we'll do the show from Dallas because we get to see Luka the next day. Fun games coming up here, so we get a test to see the best teams in the NBA and how they all look. We now send you over to the first ever 24/7 national sports channel, Locked On Sports Today. Thanks very much for joining the show today. Have a great day.